Welcome to the Copilot Show, where I interview Microsoft staff innovating with AI. I hope you will find this podcast educational and inspire you to do more with this great technology. Now, let's get on with the show. Today's guest is from Gibsons, British Columbia in Canada. He works at Microsoft as a Power Platform and Cloud Developer Advocate. He is the author of the Ribbon Workbench and other brilliant tools and libraries that are used globally. He's a developer at heart, but has embraced both low-code as well as his pro-code roots. You can find links to his bio, social media in the show notes for this episode. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be here and great to see you as well.
So true, I see, and of course our listeners won't, but your hair is still green. You've fully embraced it.
Oh, yes. You got to run with it.
Which I love. So many people that went to Color Cloud have seemed to really have embraced it and maintained it, which I think is awesome.
And you know what? I found that there's like an added benefit of it because at conferences now, you know, people can just sort of refer to me as going to see Scott. He's got green hair. So, you know, it's like you don't need, people come up to me and say, I've been told to speak to you and I know it's you because you're the only one here with green hair. So, you know.
Exactly. And what an impactful thing that Color Cloud did there.
Yeah. Oh, it was
and
great.
Matt's did, to stand out. That's brilliant. Conversations with you that I want to have. So most people in the community will know who you are, but I will jump back there in a second. But this conversation today is about a growing concern that I have noticed in the community, in that when I started my career 20 odd years ago, Microsoft created a lot of content for .NET developers to consider. Back then, MS CRM then became Dynamics 365, Dynamics CRM, those type of things, and where we used to build the OG low-code solution, right, where we would drag or place a field on a form and all the heavy lifting, API access reporting, everything was built out for us. But Microsoft did a lot of training to show .NET developers what this new world could look like, and one of the premises of it was that time to business value was massively reduced if you built this way. You could still use your developer skills because there were limitations on that platform, and you'd build plugins and you'd build workflow assemblies, etc., that would allow you to extend beyond it. I feel in the modern world that we live in the Power Platform, which is a much superior iteration of the technology that we have today to what we had back in the day. And yet there seems to not be a lot of resources to help a pro dev that has never come across a Power Platform before to get up to speed rapidly without just having to follow their nose. And what I mean by that, without getting to the point of going, oh man, that's restrictive on me. Oh, that's a limitation. I would have done it this way if I had done it. And, if I could just jump to Visual Studio and build this out myself. And it's kind of like I want to expose, if you like, not the limitations for the, oh my gosh, there's limitations, but from, hey, you do it differently here as opposed to here. And in this case, you do need to go to Pro Code. And also, I'm reviewing a book at the moment, and it's been written by another Microsoft employee, and it's around anti-patterns of the Power Platform.
Okay, yeah.
And he refers to the golden toolbox or the golden hammer, which I just think is brilliant, which is just like the Power Platform is the only thing we deal with, right? And we live in a landscape now where if you're not considering Azure as part of any solution and M365 as part of any solution and Fabric and Purview and all these other, and now, of course, AI, Copilot in the mix, you're limiting your scope if you're only going to deal with a very small set of tools that, both you and me have built our careers on Microsoft business applications. But I find my conversations with customers these days are much more broader than just those set of tools. Now, I know I've given quite a build up here. So before I let you get into answering some of my questions and my thoughts in this space, Gibsons, how did you come to be a British dude like you are?
A British dude. Wow.
A British dude living in Canada. Tell me about life and what you do for pleasure outside of your day job.
Yeah, well, that's quite a transition. I was full on there in terms of the pro code.
We'll come back to that. Well, I'm going to let you percolate it a bit while you answer this one. And yeah,
percolate. I need some coffee, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I moved here 4 years ago. So we've been coming here for a very long time. My wife's family from here. And so we're close to sisters and her mum and dad. And it's a beautiful place of the world. It really is. Really is. I mean, West Coast. West coast of Canada, mountains, ocean.
Pacific Ocean, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Great water sports, but great hiking, great skiing, really great cultures all kind of fused together in Vancouver.
Nice. If the earth was flat, I could look out my window here over the Pacific Ocean and I could probably wave to you on the other side because you're just up and around, that body of water outside is the same body of water that you dip your toes in.
I'd feel you staring at me, Mark. That I'd be sitting.
I know.
But it's actually funny because I do live right next to the ocean, actually. And there is, it's Vancouver Island is over the water. And so you can see Nanaimo and you can also see various parts of the mainland. And so I do speak to some people and they do say, if I look out the window, I could probably see you if I could see that far. But it's beautiful. And it's great to be near Seattle as well. Now working for Microsoft, and it's been great to be able to just sort of go down to Seattle to go to Richmond. It's a very short journey.
Nice.
And be on the same time
zone. Do you mainly train down?
Yeah. The Canadian Power Platform Summit just after MVP Summit, in fact. That was the last time we saw each other, I think, wasn't it?
That's right. That's right.
And so I took the bus down. I also took the train as well. The train is in North America, it's just not recognizable as trains compared to Europe. In Europe, it's like, how quick can we build these things to get from A to B, to be the most efficient possible? Whereas here, it's just more about, the journey and just, leisurely. And I think I could probably walk faster than some of the journey segments.
Okay. Are they more luxy?
No, not really. It's more that I think they just pull these huge, great container carts and, all sorts of different things. It's what you see on the movie. Well, growing up in the UK, I just saw it on the movies, right? It's like, we got to race to get across that crossing before the train, because if you don't get across the crossing, then you're going to have to wait for sort of, half an hour before. Whereas in the UK, you blink and the train's gone. So
exactly. It's different. Cool, man. So back onto our question. How's the Power Platform integrate with existing .NET ecosystems? And I gave you a lot before, but what comes to mind for you in addressing this for the pro code audience? One other thing I'll add, I have never seen an enterprise deployment on the Power Platform that was purely low code. Never.
Yeah. Yes.
An enterprise. I'm not talking about craplets or or shitty little apps. I'm talking about enterprise deployments of the Power Platform. Every single one of them, without fail, have always got a high degree of developer involvement.
Yeah. There's obviously, degrees. I think that's the right word for it. There are varying degrees. And then you say .NET ecosystems, but I think we do have to broaden it a little bit to say enterprise software development ecosystems. Because, if we come back from the traditional way of building software, like the project we were involved with a few years back that was building a system that had so many different components to it, right? We had so much user interface there. We had things that were going on. You mentioned plugins earlier, right? So extending Dataverse, extending the behaviors of the platform. But then also a lot of functionality that was happening more in a SaaS element. So running in Azure and being integrated with there. So, and you mentioned anti-patterns as well. I love anti-patterns. It seems really negative. I kind of struggle with the concept in a little bit because, we're programmed, aren't we, almost to be like positive. Oh, everything's got to be positive. But I think, or certainly being British, I think there's a certain sort of attraction in just looking at the negative angle of things, because there's a lot to be learned from mistakes. I think there's perhaps more to be learned from mistakes than there is from success.
Yeah.
And that's what anti-patterns are about. Like, we've tried this and it didn't work, and we're sharing that information with you. And so enterprise software development has got a huge number of anti-patterns that have been collected over many, many years. And I think a lot of the time the narrowing of the eyes where pro devs look at these platforms and say, okay, low code. What are you telling me here? So you're going to restrict what I can do, and you're going to tell me that I have to use these proprietary systems that don't work in the way that I'm used to working. I mean, all these kind of reactions that you get, it's a natural reaction. But really, if you broaden it and you look at enterprise software architectures, Power Platform is no different to any other architectural system. I mean, it's Azure in a box, essentially. I mean, that's what it is. Power Platform is actually just simply creating an abstraction layer on top of Azure services and allowing you to orchestrate those and extend them. So you can extend, using C# plugins. Like you said, you can extend using TypeScript in the user interface. You can extend by having JavaScript sitting inside forms. And then you can extend using custom connectors and integrating with open API endpoints, maybe Azure functions or whatever they are. But then you can also integrate as well. You've got so many different integration points like Service Bus and data flows and Synapse Link. And there's so many different things, but they're all components that you would have to consider anyway if you were building enterprise software. So it's not like you're saying, if we're creating a system, it's not like it's telling you we're prescribing exactly how you're doing it. You still have to pick the right tools for the right job. And that's no different to any software system. But what low code is trying to do is it's trying to say that we've learned from a lot of building a lot of different systems. We've learned those anti-patterns. We've learned what the things that actually are hard to do. And therefore, we're making it easier to fall into, Clay talks about the pit of success, right? Which always makes me laugh, because in a sense, it is what it's doing. It's recognizing the anti-pattern kind of methodology. So falling into the pit of success is making it easy for us to succeed. And that's the same as we do with any software component that we choose. I mean, if I was going to build a system today not using Power Platform, I would have to look at all these different libraries that if I'm going to look at the user interface and what I'm going to use, Next.js, am I going to use React, whatever? Am I going to use for my API layer? How am I going to do that? What orchestration engine am I going to use? What databases am I going to use? I'm going to use Azure API management, or, how am I going to secure it? What kind of security mechanisms am I going to put in place where I'm not going to have vulnerabilities? And of course, what I'm looking to do there is I'm looking to not have to think about those complex patterns as much as, it's not financially viable to do everything from scratch. So really, Power Platform is no different to any other software architecture. And so you're saying, you've never seen an enterprise system that's been built purely with low code. I mean, if you take out Power Platform, actually, then really, if you look at any enterprise software, I've not seen any single piece of enterprise software built from scratch in the last.
Interesting. Yeah, great.
I mean, how long? Since since the days of mainframes where people are doing machine code programming. I mean, it's always been about that raising a level of abstraction. And actually, I did a talk at Build. I don't know if you saw it, and it was really along the message of the fact that we talk about low code, right? And I think I did a blog on the Power Apps blog as well, and one of my strap lines, which was, it's always been about less code. Let's forget about low code. It's always been about less code. And that's the point. It's about how do we become more efficient? And you also said modern. You used the word modern earlier, and that kind of stood out to me because I think that's what it's about. It's like modern software developers. What does it mean to be a modern software developer? And I think that's a worthwhile question to ask anybody. Anyone who's working in software today, how is being a software engineer changed today compared to what it was even 5 years ago? I mean, we look at AI. Such fundamentally changed the way that we can work and the expectations that there are come from software. So, how does the Power Platform integrate with the software ecosystems? I think there's no different to any other libraries or platforms that we might choose.
Nice. Another scenario that I have, and This come from a real customer, largest financial institution in Australia. They have 60-odd Pega developers that, if they want to stay employed, have to get skilled up on the Power Platform because that has become a strategic initiative to migrate 400 applications to the Power Platform. And that was based on a number of factors: the licensing costs of Pega, the engineering costs of Pega, the time to build, or the lack of resources also in many cases. And so they started to really rationalize what would be built on what platform. Would it be built on SAP? Would it be built on Pega? Would it be built on Blue Prism in this case? Would it be built on the Power Platform? The Power Platform was the newcomer to the equation. So one of the challenges was, hey, here's 60-odd Pega developers. How do you onboard them to be able to build on the Power Platform in the shortest amount of possible without saying, hey, just open Copilot and talk to it and it's going to build, like, because they're going to go, yeah, nah. Like, how do you take them on that? And please don't say go and do PL 400 because there's a big disconnect in the market between certification, which generally I find end customers don't give a rip about.
Yeah.
There's only two groups that care about certification, maybe three. Microsoft was the third one. Microsoft partners because they need certification to maintain certain status levels. And then individuals that want to prove they've developed a certain set of skills or they've passed an exam. That aside, so as I say, back in the day, there used to be kind of like on-ramps to what we had with XRM. If you're going to do this, this is how you do it. Here's the limitations. Don't do that. Do that this way. How would you answer that?
Let's take a quick break.
Are you ready to transform your career in just 90 days? Join me on the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge and unlock your full potential. As I listen to the podcast, enroll now and get 10% off using the code MBAP. That's MBAP at the checkout. Don't miss this opportunity to learn from industry leaders and accelerate your growth. Visit ako.nz365guy.com and start your journey today.
Yeah, it is a difficult one. I mean, the certification, I hear what you say about the fact that it's not ideal. There's a lot of things which don't quite hit the mark in terms of covering the content from a practical perspective. However, it's worthwhile. I think it is worthwhile saying that doing that will give you a good starting point. It's like a springboard, right? You do that. So it's better than not doing it at all. I think that's the point.
Yeah, knowledge transfer happens, and I think fundamentally that's what it's all about. This is why I never really got upset when I had staff that I would know get cheat sheets and stuff to prep for exams.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, knowledge transfer was still happening.
Yeah.
They were still understanding a concept and getting the right answer and prepping for that exam. So knowledge transfer was happening, which is the fundamental reason why I think certification is good, and also it points out blind spots.
Yeah. Yes,
the failings of certification is that it's academic. And what I mean by that, the Microsoft process is built based on academia principles from way back in the day. And like I used to write the exams for Microsoft, so I kind of know the things that you have to do around what's called legal defensibility of a wrong answer and things like that, right? There's very much tight control. The problem is it abstracts away from reality in many situations.
Yeah.
And there's what we call the Microsoft answer and then the actual answer. And of course,
I always
passing an exam.
overthink it every time when I do these. I was like, well, it depends. And, I did this project
right.
and actually it was you end up like getting into this analysis paralysis. And actually that's the wrong way to take these exams. You've got to know what is the syllabus actually asking, do you know this particular piece of information?
That's it. That's 100%. So anyhow, we digress. But
but once you've done that, once you've got that in the bag, I think it gives you a good service area. Now, it's funny you should mention that Copilot, because I think if we wind back maybe, 3 years ago, then one of the biggest reasons I saw Power Platform projects going off the rails somewhat was because the developers were approaching it in from a perspective that they've done every other project that they've done. We're using the technologies they used to be using for the last however many years. So it's like, okay, well, we're used to it. We're experienced building the software using this technology. We can actually create something very, very quickly because we've done it many, many times. So the expectation is then, okay, right, well, Power Platform, you're telling me Power Platform and low code is meant to solve so many different problems and make it easier for me to build software. Therefore, the expectation is I should just be able to rock up, open a browser and start to build enterprise software, and that's never going to happen. You can't expect that from no matter what. There's always going to be a learning curve. And so really it's down to, I think what Power Platform does, which is quite unique, I think, is that the return that you get, it goes up over time and the cost of building apps goes down. There may be initially quite a high transition period where you've got to do all of the learning, but then actually very quickly, it's almost like an exponential reduction in cost of building apps. But my advice would be to learn by example. I mean, there's a whole ton of samples out there. You can go to places like PMP sites. You can use Copilot to create stuff now to see what it does. So for example, the new Copilot functionality in Power Platform building allows you to do multi-table relationships. So
correct, yeah.
You can describe it. So you can create, and then you can have a conversation about your data. You can see how it builds the structure. It's not going to be perfect, obviously, but it's going to give you a very good starting point. And then you can then see how it builds the app. You can see what it does in terms of creating an app that's responsive, that works in multiple different device formats. You can see how it creates an offline profile to allow you to go off, because it does this just without you even asking for it to do it. So it's almost like, one of the things they say about AI, I think, which is probably going to be quite revolutionary in teaching kids, is that in the past, it's always been about like a teacher at the front of the class teaching a large group of people. And that means that there's always been this challenge, is like, how can you teach that's going to suit everybody's style of learning?
100%.
And that's really hard. Whereas with AI, it's almost like we're getting to a point where you can have an individual tutor for every single member of that class. And I think that's where we're moving with Copilot, is that it's now working at your speed. It's talking your language. It's actually doing things on your request, the speed that you are learning in the particular area you're learning. And so I think that's not to be underestimated. And I think we're going to see more and more of that going forward. So that will make a big 100%. Difference. And I think if you look at GitHub Copilot, I mean, I'm a massive, massive fan of GitHub Copilot. I've been using it from a pro code perspective for a long time since it came out, writing PCFs and writing, C#. And it's great, it does a lot of things, and it's scarily good at doing programming, creating algorithms and sort things, and it's almost feels like it's reading your mind. But ultimately, you still have to fill in a lot of the other things. You have to have knowledge about the context that you're working in. You have to have the knowledge about security best practices. How are you going to monitor how is it going to get deployed, and how are you going to maintain it in production, and all of those kind of things. Whereas what Power Platform does is it sort of raises that abstraction to now allow Copilot to do a huge more in terms of what it's showing you how you can do, because it's building software at a higher level of abstraction. So you get a lot further down the line a lot quicker. So it's showing you best practices of creating an app, and such that you could actually deploy that app. I mean, you would be hard pressed to do that with Copilot in GitHub. You couldn't just ask GitHub to do something and then suddenly you've got something you can actually deploy out to people as an end user. You've got a lot more work. And I think that's what's interesting about modern software development. And I think this is the key. It's not specifically Power Platform. It's modern software development, is that we have to take this next level of abstraction up, so that in the past, there's always been this alluring, very quick to get up and running in your IDE, in Visual Studio or VS Code. You can use containerization and you can just, create databases, and there it is. It's running on a local dev server. But there's this kind of technical debt that's growing. It's this sort of these icebergs below the surface that's about like, well, how are you going to transition this into a production environment? How are you going to support it? How are you going to do the audits of security? How are you going to make sure that all your users can only have access to the right data? How are you going to make sure that you don't have any data leakage and backup? And how are you going to create your environments? All these things that you don't want to think about. And traditional software development leaves that to a lot later stage. And I think that's why Agile came along, trying to have this very short product increments. It's like quickly get it, make sure that every single product increment is deployable. And the reason we're doing that is because we're making sure that we think it's forcing us to think about those things, the things that are inconvenient and uncomfortable, and I don't want to because I'm a developer and I just want to churn out code. It's forcing us to do those boring things about how do we support it. But from a modern software development, I think it's actually answering that question in a different way. It's solving in a different way. It's saying that actually by building in the framework that the platform gives us, all those guardrails are created for us. All of that observability and that monitorability and the governance and the security auditability is all there just as a given when you develop within those particular boundaries.
Back to my question, is there any resources that you'd point people to, or are we lacking resources that we could take people that are coming off other, heavy developed platforms and get them onboarded quicker that really are coming from a pro code perspective rather than a low code?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're working on in advocacy is samples. I mean, that's what we want to do, is to give enterprise grade samples. And we're working on a project which is converting one of the samples, enterprise samples that's been built already. It's in GitHub under the Azure Samples repo. And it's called the Contosa Real Estate. And it's got so many different components in there. Not some of them are open source, some of them are bespoke, built from the ground up. And so what we're doing is we're showing how you can use Power Platform in tandem with many of the different Azure resources. It's not, let's rebuild the thing. It's not like, let's show how easy it is to do it in Power Platform. And to your point, no enterprise software, grade software can use entirely Power Platform these days because let's face it, I mean, if you think about the composable architecture diagram that quite often gets shown in Power Platform presentations, you've got three layers. At the bottom, you've got your HR, you've got your finance systems, your SAPs, all that. The stuff that really can't change, there's massive friction to change. And I think that's what defines enterprise software. That is the single piece that defines enterprise software, is the fact that there is huge amounts of things that are just not changeable. Enterprise software is not greenfield. Very rarely is it greenfield. Even if it is greenfield, like a bank, for example, let's say you and I were going to start a bank tomorrow. That's a scary prospect. But let's say we were going to do that. Then you're not going to go and build your banking system, are you? You're going to bring that in and as
buy it off the shelf.
Exactly. So from enterprise software, you've got stuff that can't change. So then there's going to be that layer in the middle between your Power Platform, the stuff that's highly agile, highly easy to build. You can experiment, you can innovate. There's always a middle layer that you have to integrate with. And so what we're doing is we're trying to create a sample that you can learn from. So we've realized exactly the same thing that you're pointing out, that we've gone through a period of time where the focus has been so much on low code that all the samples that have been being put out there have been almost hypothetical, pure low code samples. The pendulum has kind of swung too far in one direction. So in advocacy, we're trying to do that by we've recognized the gap in that, and we're trying to create that. And so in Vegas at, what's it called now? Power Platform Community Conference.
Correct, yes.
we will be making that as a public repo and doing some sessions on that.
Nice. I like that. One of the other things that I have noticed, and it kind of speaks to this developer, but then let's say go up to the enterprise architecture layer, and there's a big difference between software architecture and enterprise architecture.
Yeah.
And I wasn't clarifying that for you. I was clarifying that for the listeners. And what I have noticed is that there has been no messaging from Microsoft that is targeted at enterprise architects. What Microsoft enterprise architects have heard, and I'm talking about from predominantly Microsoft field sellers, is that this amazing low-code platform anybody can build solutions on it. And the enterprise architect hears those words and they go, so anybody could build anything. And I know anybody means they don't have any concept of ALM. They don't have any concept of security. They don't have any concept of, they've not been educated on these things. And we're going to allow them to build on this platform that could potentially be plugged into different systems. And I hear this kind of thing. This sounds like Excel in the cloud, what you're providing here. And we will never, we've learned from, enterprise applications built on Excel accidentally or become mission critical applications. We're not going to allow that to happen again.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I see is CTOs and CIOs turning to the enterprise architecture team and saying, what do you think of this Power Platform? And they're like, yeah, it's not going to be our enterprise platform of choice. It's not going to be part of our enterprise mix because anybody can build on it. It can't be serious. The problem is there's no investigation from that point, right? People just cover their butts. We're out, and decisions are made. And I think there's this whole segment, like if you go and look at ServiceNow, if you go and look at Pega, all their plays to enterprise architects, why you should trust us, why you should build it. We've got a superior product, I believe, than ServiceNow, and in many cases in Pega. But because they've been positioned differently, they are adopted even at much higher price points and things because they've been positioned differently in market. And I'm not saying you should go away from the personas we're positioned to, but I feel that we've lacked the enterprise architect conversation coming from Microsoft. And unfortunately, Microsoft field sellers don't know how to have that conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
it's using the terminology.
To be a pattern put out there.
It's using you have to use the language that enterprise architects are used to using because, they are a different group of people speaking a different language because they have to think about a much broader set of challenges than, your application architecture or your software architecture. I mean, that's why I really liked, the Cloud Lighthouse white paper that you put out recently. I mean, I think that did a very good job of speaking that enterprise architect language of looking at a Power Platform. And you're right. We need more of that. And it's patterns at the end of the day, because that's where it doesn't matter which level you're at looking at. It's patterns. That's how traditional software engineering has always been built around. My bookshelf has got like books, of enterprise software architecture patterns, as well as right down to the Gang of Four design patterns in, software engineering at every single level of abstraction. So the more content that we can do, I agree on that. And also showing how traditional enterprise software still apply. That's the thing. It's not a new, that's the point. It's just like, we're not asking people to change the way that people think about software. And that's a misconception, I think, that comes from that composable architecture diagram, right? People see that, and it perhaps the messaging is not given well enough that it's not an either or. We're not saying throw out everything else you've been doing and now just do it like this. Yeah.
Scott, we're up on time. It's been so good talking to you. We might need to do another episode.
That sounds great. That'll be my pleasure. It's always great talking to you, Mark.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 guy. Is there a guest you would like to see on the show from Microsoft? Please message me on LinkedIn and I'll see what I can do. Final question for you. How will you create with Copilot today? Ka kite.